James Clear did not emerge overnight as a heavyweight name, nor as an expert shaped in academic laboratories far removed from practical reality. His philosophy was born organically, out of a traumatic episode that almost cost him his life in his youth. During high school, he suffered a violent accident when a baseball bat struck him directly in the face. The impact was devastating, resulting in multiple fractures, seizures, and even the need for a medically induced coma to save his life. What seemed like mere tragedy became the turning point that shaped his vision of discipline, persistence, and incremental change. While many might have resigned themselves to a life marked by physical and mental aftereffects, James decided to rebuild himself step by step, cultivating simple yet powerful habits that allowed him to regain control of his trajectory. This is where his philosophy begins to take shape. The idea that it is not grand revolutions that transform us, but small adjustments made daily and sustained with consistency. Recovery was neither easy nor fast. It took months of physical therapy, medical treatments, and adaptation to a new routine. James discovered that if he set goals too large, he would end up frustrated by the distance between his reality and the ideal. For this reason, he began clinging to small daily victories. He built micro-habits, simple exercises, consistent reading, reflective journaling, small acts of discipline which, when added together, created a solid foundation for his recovery. What might have been just a technique to endure pain became a philosophy of life, which later turned into a global reference work. This process also gave birth to his vision of the importance of measuring progress not in giant leaps, but in silent increments, which, when accumulated, redefine the future. When he entered university, James was not recognized as someone brilliant or with leadership potential. On the contrary, he still carried the shadow of his physical limitations. Nevertheless, he continued applying his philosophy of small, constant improvements. He joined the college baseball team not as a star, but as a disciplined and consistent player. Over time, these micro-habits led him to become the team captain and to be recognized as an outstanding academic athlete. This experience revealed to him that the real world responds less to natural talent and more to the sum of continuous, systematic behaviors. It was this insight that drove him to investigate the science of habits, exploring studies in psychology, neuroscience, and human behavior, which he then translated into practical language that anyone could apply. His philosophy consolidated with writing. James began sharing his thoughts in a blog, regularly publishing reflections on productivity, habits, and continuous improvement. He committed to writing twice a week without fail. This seemingly simple commitment became the engine of his career. The articles were clear, objective, and actionable, attracting more and more readers. This process revealed another of his central convictions. It is not the isolated act that transforms, but the discipline of repeating the action until it becomes part of one's identity. Over the years, this blog grew exponentially, reaching millions of people and establishing James Clear as a global reference. Thus, the impact of his philosophy was not born solely from theory, but from a sustained practice that proved, with each post, the effectiveness of his own principles. In time, Clear realized that his ideas had universal reach. The concept of atomic habits, small but powerful, like fundamental particles that make up everything that exists, perfectly encapsulated his vision. The term atomic referred not only to the tiny size of habits, but also to their explosive capacity to generate radical transformations when accumulated. What began as a survival diary and personal adaptation became a philosophy of performance, applied to executives, athletes, students, artists, and ordinary people seeking to improve some aspect of their lives. He showed that genius does not lie in reinventing the world every day, but in constantly adjusting the invisible details that shape our behavior. The impact of this philosophy in the modern world is immense. In a scenario where people seek shortcuts, magic formulas, and instant transformations, James Clear became a counterpoint, someone who proves with science and experience that true power lies in silent consistency. The success of his book, Atomic Habits, translated into dozens of languages and sold in millions of copies, confirms this collective need for a practical and sustainable approach. More than selling a book, he offered a mental framework, a new way of perceiving personal development. His origin marked by pain became the greatest example of what he teaches. Each habit, no matter how small, is a brick that builds an invisible yet unshakable fortress. James Clear is not just a successful author, he has become a cultural reference. His philosophy crosses the corporate world, elite sports, and the daily lives of millions of people who today can see progress where once there was only stagnation. The origin of it all shows the strength of his coherence. He does not teach something he has not lived. He does not theorize without practice. His impact is so powerful because his story is, in itself, the proof that atomic habits work. Habits are like invisible chains that shape the course of our lives without us even realizing it. Most of the time, we believe our choices are the result of conscious reasoning and deliberate decisions, but the science of human behavior shows exactly the opposite. The majority of our daily actions are governed by automatic patterns acquired over time, repeated until they become almost instinctive. From the way we brush our teeth, the routes we take while driving, to the recurring thoughts we silently nurture, everything is the result of habits ingrained in our brain. This invisible power makes habits far more decisive than pure willpower, as they function like mental shortcuts that save energy and establish routines that we can hardly break. James Clear understands that this hidden dimension of life is both our prison and our freedom. Those who learn to shape their habits begin to shape their own reality. To understand this mechanism, it is necessary to look at the human brain. Regions such as the basal ganglia are directly linked to habit formation, creating automatic circuits of action and response. These processes were shaped by evolution as a way of saving cognitive energy and ensuring efficiency. Imagine if every time you had to open a door, you needed to deliberate about the arm movement, the strength to apply, or the direction of the handle. Living like that would be unbearable. Habits automate processes, allowing the brain to focus on more complex decisions. The problem is that this same efficiency can solidify harmful behaviors. A habit of smoking, procrastinating, or eating uncontrollably follows the same mechanism as a habit of reading, exercising, or working with focus. The difference does not lie in the system, but in the content inserted into it. James Clear insists that habits are like seeds, invisible at first, but capable of becoming large trees that dominate all the space around them. A small choice repeated daily may seem irrelevant in the short term, but its accumulated effect over the years shapes careers, relationships, and destinies. The invisible power of habits is precisely this. While neglected, they grow in silence and lead us to places we often did not consciously choose. The person who today feels their life is out of control did not arrive at that point abruptly, but rather through the repetition of micro-choices that, when added up, created an inevitable direction. This is why Clear states that habits are like the compound interest of self-development. Each repetition reinforces the behavior, and each accumulated repetition generates exponential results. This power is also the reason why changing habits is so challenging. When an action becomes automated, the brain defends it as something natural and necessary. It is not enough to simply decide to change. It is necessary to redesign the structures that sustain that habit. This involves environmental triggers, social rewards, and even the way we identify with the action. A person who tries to quit smoking, relying solely on willpower, is fighting an unequal battle against years of neural conditioning. On the other hand, someone who modifies their environment, replaces triggers, and redefines their identity as a non-smoker has much greater chances of success. The invisible power of habits cannot be fought head-on, but rather redirected strategically. Modern life makes this debate even more urgent. We live in an environment saturated with stimuli, with algorithms and entire companies designed to capture our attention and reinforce habits of consumption, distraction, and passivity. Social networks, for example, are built on intermittent rewards that exploit the brain's dopamine, making constant phone checking almost uncontrollable. This proves that habits are not merely individual matters, but also social and cultural ones, shaped by external forces that push us toward repetitive behaviors. Recognizing this influence is the first step in regaining control. James Clear warns that if we do not direct our habits, someone else will, and almost always for their own benefit, not for our growth. The crucial point here is to understand that habits define not only what we do, but who we become. Identity is formed by accumulated evidence, and that evidence is the habits we practice. If a person reads every day, even just a few pages, they reinforce the identity of a reader. If someone exercises regularly, even briefly, they strengthen the identity of an athlete. In the same way, procrastination and self-sabotage also shape identities of failure. Thus, habits are much more than routines. They are invisible tools that build our character and reputation. The question is not whether we have habits, but whether they are leading us in the direction of who we want to be. James Clear brilliantly explains that this invisible power is both a curse and a blessing. A curse, because bad habits can slowly ruin a person's life without them noticing, until the weight becomes unbearable. A blessing, because the same mechanisms that destroy can be used to build, and any individual can reprogram their actions toward a better future. By illuminating this invisible aspect of human life, Clear not only offers hope, but also responsibility. He shows that although we cannot control what we feel or think at every moment, we can control what we repeat. And it is in repetition that destiny is shaped. The compound effect is one of the most powerful and at the same time most neglected concepts by most people. It is based on a simple logic. Small actions, seemingly insignificant in the short term, accumulate over time until they generate disproportionate results. This idea, applied by James Clear in Atomic Habits, shows that success does not arise from great bursts of effort or radical transformations in a single day, but from the silent sum of micro-decisions that, repeated daily, produce massive change. The mathematical analogy is clear. Improving just 1% each day means multiplying results nearly 38 times by the end of a year. On the other hand, declining 1% daily leads to absolute downfall. This slow but relentless progression is what makes the compound effect an invisible phenomenon, yet capable of redefining entire lives. The human brain, however, was not designed to understand this type of exponential growth. Our mind is intuitively linear. We believe great efforts produce immediate great results, and that small actions produce only small effects. This illusion is the root of our impatience and our premature abandonment of change. We want to lose weight in a few weeks, get rich in a few months, learn a language in a few days. When we do not see quick progress, we assume the effort is useless. James Clear exposes this cognitive flaw by showing that the compound effect does not reveal itself in the short term, but rather in the invisible curve that at a certain point skyrockets toward visible and impressive results. The key, therefore, is to believe in the process before the fruits are evident. A practical example helps illustrate this reality. Imagine two people who decide to change their health. The first adopts a radical diet and intense workouts, but quits after a few weeks for failing to sustain the pace. The second simply replaces soda with water, walks 15 minutes a day, and goes to bed a little earlier each night. In the first month, the second person's results seem irrelevant, almost imperceptible. But after a year, the difference is striking. Weight loss, more energy, better mood, and greater longevity. The compound effect operates in silence but never fails to reward consistency. This same logic applies to finances, career, relationships, and any area of life. That is why simple habits, when well chosen, become seeds of extraordinary transformations. James Clear emphasizes that the key is not intensity, but consistency. A single reading of 50 pages in a day does not make anyone a reader, but reading 10 pages every day for years creates a sharp mind and a solid identity. In the same way, an occasional exhausting run does not create physical conditioning, but small doses of frequent exercise reshape the body and mind. The trap of immediacy is believing that great results demand great isolated efforts, when in reality, they depend on small, sustained efforts. This principle redefines the very notion of discipline. It is not about sacrificing oneself intensely in rare moments, but about committing to constant, almost invisible improvements. The compound effect also explains the phenomenon of tipping points. For a long time, changes may seem insignificant, like ice being warmed from -5 to -3, then to -1 degree. Nothing appears to happen. But at the moment the temperature reaches 0 degrees, transformation occurs. The ice melts. All previous effort was not useless, but part of the preparation for this decisive instant. The same logic applies to any personal transformation. Studying a little every day may seem useless until suddenly you realize you master a new language. Saving small amounts of money may seem too slow until, within a few years, a life-changing reserve accumulates. Patience is the price to be paid to reap the fruits of the compound effect. This concept also has a dark side, the negative compound effect. Small slips, constantly repeated, lead to disastrous results. Eating a sweet every day, skipping a workout occasionally, spending small amounts recklessly, all seem harmless in the moment. But over the years, they build an invisible debt that exacts its toll relentlessly. That is why James Clear insists so strongly on awareness of every habit. What we do almost automatically is not neutral. It is either bringing us closer to who we want to be or pushing us further away. The compound effect never stops working, and it is up to us to decide whether it will be our ally or our enemy. The great lesson is that no one becomes extraordinary suddenly. Success, as Clear describes it, is the inevitable consequence of thousands of accumulated micro-victories. Each repetition is a vote of confidence in a new identity. Each small action is a piece of an invisible mosaic that over time reveals the complete work. The compound effect reminds us that there are no permanent shortcuts, but there is a guaranteed path to any transformation, improving a little every day until the impossible becomes inevitable. Most people believe that their behaviors are the result of well-defined goals. They tell themselves, I want to lose weight, I want to read more, I want to make money, and then they look for plans or methods that promise to lead them to those objectives. James Clear, however, subverts this traditional logic by affirming that actions do not come first, but rather identity. In other words, what you believe yourself to be is what sustains and gives consistency to what you do. If someone sees themselves as a lazy person, even if they follow a diet for a few weeks, sooner or later the behavior will collapse because the identity does not sustain that action. But when someone begins to identify as a healthy, disciplined, creative, or studious person, their daily choices become consistent with that new role. Identity is the foundation. Behavior is only the visible facade of that structure. This principle stems from a simple observation. Every action we take is a vote in favor of the identity we are building. Reading one page is a vote to become a reader. Writing one sentence is a vote to become a writer. Training for a few minutes is a vote to become an athlete. These isolated votes may seem irrelevant, but their accumulation consolidates the belief that I am this type of person. Identity, therefore, is not fixed or immutable. It is built daily through the evidence we give ourselves. At this point, James Clear distances himself from superficial motivational approaches that only reinforce catchphrases. He shows that true motivation is born from coherence. When our actions confirm what we believe ourselves to be, discipline becomes natural. This shift in focus has powerful practical implications. Imagine someone who wants to quit smoking. The traditional path is to say, I want to quit smoking because it is bad for my health. But this statement still carries an identity tied to the act. I am a smoker, trying to quit. Now compare it to someone who responds to the offer of a cigarette by saying, no thank you, I am not a smoker. This second answer does not speak of a goal, but of an identity. And it is exactly this shift that radically changes the way the brain perceives the action. The struggle is no longer against the cigarette, but against the inconsistency between the assumed identity and the behavior. In this scenario, identity acts as an invisible compass that guides choices. James Clear emphasizes that one of the greatest traps of self-development is chasing results without questioning the identity that sustains them. It is common to see people who manage to lose weight quickly, but soon regain it, because they never stopped seeing themselves as someone who hates exercise or cannot eat healthy. Likewise, professionals who achieve financial success but continue to carry the identity of disorganized people quickly lose what they have achieved. Isolated actions can generate temporary results, but only solid identities produce lasting change. The real question is not what you achieve, but who you become in the process. This point also leads us to a deeper philosophical reflection. If identity shapes actions, then building habits is actually a process of self-creation. Each choice is a silent statement of who we wish to be. This means that even when we repeat bad behaviors, we are reinforcing an undesired identity. It is as if, with each act, we cast a vote for a version of ourselves. James Clear shows that we do not need to wait for grand results to believe in a new identity. We just need to collect small pieces of evidence every day. Reading 10 pages does not make you a genius, but it proves you are a reader. Writing one sentence does not make you a published author, but it confirms you are a writer. These small proofs are invisible bricks that build an unshakable identity over time. This principle of identity before action also connects habits to self-esteem. When a person acts in disagreement with the identity they wish to assume, they undermine their inner confidence. But when their actions confirm what they believe themselves to be, they reinforce a cycle of self-respect and consistency. Thus, habits are not just tools of productivity, they are means of sustaining personal dignity. Each repetition aligned with the desired identity is a silent victory that strengthens self-confidence. That is why James Clear insists that changing habits is less about forced discipline and more about rewriting the narrative we tell ourselves. The great lesson of this block is that, to truly change, we need to stop asking, "What do I want to achieve?" and start asking, "Who do I want to become?" Actions can fail, goals can be abandoned, but consolidated identities are hardly undone. Once someone believes they are a reader, a writer, an athlete, an entrepreneur, or a creator, their choices begin to gravitate around that identity almost naturally. That is how small habits stop being exhausting tasks and become authentic expressions of who we are. No habit is born out of nothing. Every repeated and consolidated behavior follows a psychological structure that can be broken down into clear stages. James Clear shows that understanding this mechanism is essential to create good habits or dismantle negative patterns. This structure is known as the habit loop, composed of 4 essential elements: trigger, routine, reward, and belief. When these elements work together, they form a gear that strengthens with each repetition. This perspective reveals that habits are not just choices, but automatic systems that can be consciously shaped. The first element is the trigger. It is the signal, the cue, the thing that awakens the desire or sets the stage for an automatic action. Triggers can be visual, emotional, social, or environmental. A cup of coffee on the table can trigger the urge to smoke. A phone notification sparks the impulse to check social media. A specific smell can provoke hunger, and even a fixed time can condition the body to expect a certain activity. James Clear explains that if we want to master our habits, we must learn to identify and manipulate these triggers. A positive habit should be associated with clear and accessible triggers, while negative habits can be weakened by making their triggers invisible or distant. The second element is the routine, that is, the action itself. It is the repeated behavior that follows the trigger and becomes a pattern over time. This routine can be healthy, such as exercising, meditating, or studying, or harmful, such as procrastinating, overeating, or smoking. James Clear emphasizes that the routine itself is just an automated response, which is why it is not effective to fight against it with sheer willpower. It is more efficient to redesign the loop, replacing harmful routines with positive ones that still respond to the same trigger. In other words, a habit is not eliminated, but exchanged for another behavior that produces a different outcome. The third element is the reward. It is what closes the loop and strengthens the habit in the brain. Every routine persists because it produces some kind of immediate benefit, whether pleasure, relief, distraction, or satisfaction. Eating a sweet brings instant pleasure. Smoking may bring a feeling of relaxation. Procrastinating offers relief from pressure. These results create a neural reinforcement, releasing neurotransmitters like dopamine, which mark the behavior as something that should be repeated. The problem is that immediate rewards often come with negative long-term consequences. That is why good habits are harder to form. They usually offer delayed rewards such as health, knowledge, or prosperity, which take time to become visible. James Clear teaches us to make positive rewards more evident and immediate, creating systems that reinforce desired behaviors. The fourth element, often overlooked, is belief. Without it, the loop cannot sustain itself. Belief is the psychological component that makes us trust that the routine truly brings us closer to the identity we desire. It is the invisible link that turns a practice into a lasting part of life. When we believe that a certain habit makes us stronger, smarter, or healthier, we strengthen our willingness to keep it even in the face of difficulties. Likewise, when we do not believe in the effectiveness of a change, we are unlikely to sustain it. James Clear shows that without belief, the cycle breaks. But with solid belief, even the most challenging habits can be consolidated. This structure reveals why changing habits requires more than fleeting motivation. It is not enough to simply want to be different. It is necessary to intervene at the right points in the loop. If you want to create a positive habit, start by defining a clear trigger, making the routine simple and accessible, creating visible rewards, and nurturing a genuine belief that it matters. If you want to eliminate a bad habit, make the trigger invisible, make the routine more difficult, reduce the immediate reward, and replace the belief that sustains that behavior. In this way, you are not merely trying to resist the force of a gear, but redesigning it to work in your favor. By understanding the habit loop, we realize that our actions are not the result of mysterious weaknesses or talents, but of systems, and systems can be modified. This realization is liberating because it takes us out of the role of victims of willpower and places us as architects of our own routines. James Clear synthesizes this clearly. There is no need to wait for inspiration. It is enough to adjust triggers, routines, rewards, and beliefs so that the desired behavior becomes inevitable. James Clear built his work, Atomic Habits, on a practical and scientifically grounded foundation, 4 simple laws that form the heart of his philosophy. These principles, known as the 4 pillars of habits, work as a strategic manual for creating new behaviors and dismantling harmful patterns. They are: make the habit obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying. The power of this structure lies precisely in its simplicity. It is not about abstract concepts, but about clear rules that can be applied to any aspect of life, from health to productivity, from relationships to finances. These pillars transform theory into actionable practice, offering a safe path for anyone who wants to reprogram their daily life. The first pillar is make the habit obvious. This means bringing clarity to the desired behavior and ensuring that the triggers which spark it are visible in the environment. A habit only happens if it is remembered, and the human brain works associatively. If a book is always in sight, the likelihood of it being read increases. If workout clothes are ready by the bedside, the probability of exercising in the morning grows. On the other hand, hiding the triggers of bad habits, such as removing social media apps from the home screen or avoiding keeping sweets at home, drastically reduces the chances of repeating them. James Clear shows that often it is not a lack of discipline, but an excess of invisibility that kills good habits before they even start. The second pillar is make the habit attractive. Human beings are driven by emotional rewards, and every behavior needs to be associated with some kind of pleasure or desire in order to be sustained. The idea is to manipulate how the brain perceives a certain act, making it more appealing. A classic example is the technique of pairing, linking a desired habit with something enjoyable. If someone likes listening to music, they can reserve their favorite playlists only for when they are running. If they enjoy coffee, they can use it as reinforcement for morning reading. Moreover, changing the perception of the act itself is also fundamental. Instead of seeing exercise as punishment, it can be reframed as an opportunity for energy and vitality. James Clear teaches that by making a habit attractive, we increase anticipatory dopamine, and the brain begins to crave the behavior even before performing it. The third pillar is make the habit easy, D. Complexity is the enemy of consistency. If something requires excessive effort to start, the brain tends to procrastinate. That is why Clear advocates maximum simplification. Reducing friction, preparing the environment, and cutting down the number of steps to execution are essential strategies. Want to start playing guitar? Keep it out of the case and within reach. Want to exercise? Choose an activity that doesn't depend on complicated logistics or expensive equipment. In addition, there is the 2-minute rule. Any habit should be reduced to a version that can be initiated in just 2 minutes. Read every day can begin with read 1 page. Meditate daily can simply be sit and breathe for 2 minutes. The turning point is that once the action begins, it naturally tends to expand. The initial ease eliminates the psychological barrier that prevents the habit from gaining momentum. The fourth pillar is make the habit satisfying. This stage powerfully closes the loop, as it ensures the brain records the action as something worth repeating. Immediate rewards are crucial, since our neurological system is not naturally wired to value long-term benefits. Saving money for retirement seems abstract, but immediately seeing a progress bar fill up in a finance app gives the brain the satisfaction needed to continue. Similarly, marking completed days on a calendar creates a sense of visible progress that works as positive reinforcement. For bad habits, the opposite principle should be applied. Make the act unsatisfying. Establishing social or financial consequences for undesired behaviors, such as promising to pay a symbolic fine to a friend if a goal is not met, creates immediate discomfort that helps weaken the negative pattern. The true power of the 4 pillars lies in their combined application. When a desired habit is obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying, it becomes almost inevitable. Conversely, when a harmful habit is invisible, unattractive, difficult, and unsatisfying, it tends to fade away. This structure works as a universal code for behavior engineering, proving that it is not willpower that sustains lasting transformations, but the intelligent design of environment and rewards. James Clear shows that by applying these laws, anyone can take control of their destiny, rewriting automatic patterns that once seemed uncontrollable. Few people realize how much the physical environment shapes their behavior. Most believe they act according to willpower, when in reality it is the surrounding space that silently dictates much of their decisions. James Clear states that the environment is the invisible hand that guides human behavior. This means that if we truly want to change, we need to redesign the settings in which we live and work. The environment functions as a system of permanent triggers. What is easily in front of us tends to be used, while what is hidden tends to be forgotten. Thus, those who want to transform their lives must learn to consciously manipulate the physical and social stimuli that surround their choices. A simple example demonstrates the power of this idea. In a cafe in the United States, researchers reorganized the placement of beverages, putting bottles of water in more visible and accessible places than sodas. The result was immediate. Water sales increased significantly, without any marketing campaign being necessary. This shows that in many cases, it is not a lack of discipline that prevents change, but the invisible architecture of the environment. If sweets are always on the table, they will be eaten. If books are hidden, reading decreases. If the television is the centerpiece of the living room, the tendency will be to watch more hours than necessary. James Clear teaches that true discipline is designing a space where desired habits become inevitable. The central idea is that the way we organize the environment determines the habits we practice. To create positive habits, it is necessary to make the triggers visible and accessible. This means keeping sliced fruit in the fridge, preparing workout clothes the night before, or keeping work instruments well organized on the desk. To eliminate bad habits, the opposite logic should be applied. Make triggers invisible or harder to reach. Storing snacks on high shelves, removing social media apps from the home screen, or even changing the TV password to something harder are small barriers that drastically reduce the frequency of undesired behaviors. In this way, the environment becomes a strategic ally rather than an invisible enemy. Beyond the physical space, there is also the social environment, which is equally powerful. Being in constant contact with people who share the identity we want to adopt increases the chances of that behavior becoming natural. If you surround yourself with readers, reading becomes more common. If the group values physical activity, discipline with exercise is reinforced. On the other hand, bad habits are also contagious. Social influence can be either a positive or negative reinforcement, and recognizing this factor is essential. James Clear shows that changing the social environment can be as important as changing the physical space. Often, the simple act of joining new circles or communities can be the trigger for lasting transformation. Another central aspect of environmental architecture is the concept of friction. Small barriers or facilitations completely change the likelihood of an action taking place. The more friction exists to start a habit, the less likely it is to be repeated. Likewise, reducing friction increases adherence. If you want to play guitar every day, leaving the instrument in the living room within reach makes the habit more likely than if it is stored in a distant cabinet. If you want to reduce television consumption, unplugging the power cord or keeping the remote control in another room adds enough friction to discourage the behavior. The key is to manipulate the degree of initial difficulty. Make what you want to maintain easier. and what you want to eliminate harder. This approach transforms the way we see discipline. Instead of relying solely on inner strength, James Clear shows us that we can outsource part of the responsibility to the environment. This does not mean the absence of effort, but rather strategic intelligence. When the space is redesigned, discipline becomes natural because the right triggers are always in front of us. This explains why people in certain contexts seem more productive, healthy, or organized. It is not that they are stronger, but that they live in environments structured to favor those behaviors. The final point is that the environment silently decides who we will be. Ignoring this is allowing oneself to be dominated by a space that was not planned but merely inherited. Taking control means consciously designing the physical and social environment that reinforces the desired identity. Ultimately, environmental architecture is the art of aligning the external world with the person we want to become. Most people still believe that the secret to success lies in defining clear goals and pursuing them with determination. Goals are important, no doubt, but James Clear demonstrates that they are not enough. The true engine of lasting change does not lie in goals, but in the redefine systems that sustain habits. Goals are the destination, systems are the path. While goals are outcomes we wish to achieve, systems are the processes we repeat daily. And it is precisely this repetition that determines where we end up. In other words, you don't reach the top because of the goal you set, but because of the system you practice. Clear explains that goals have three major limitations. First, they are temporary. Someone who sets a goal to lose 10 kilos may reach that number, but without a maintenance system, the lost weight will return. Second, goals can generate frustration, since progress rarely happens linearly. When the expectation is rigid, any deviation feels like failure. Third, goals restrict vision, as they focus only on the endpoint and ignore the process of personal transformation. Systems, on the other hand, are lasting, flexible, and shape identity. A person who builds the system of exercising every day does not need a fixed goal to stay healthy. The habit itself guarantees continuous results. The invisible discipline of systems lies precisely in the fact that they function even when motivation fails. Motivation is volatile, but systems are automatic. If you depend on willpower to act, there will be days when the effort seems unbearable. But if you build a system, such as preparing workout clothes the night before, setting a fixed reading schedule, or automating a monthly savings plan, the process happens with little resistance. James Clear teaches that the secret is designing systems that minimize the need for deliberation. The less we depend on willpower, the more guaranteed our progress becomes. This reasoning applies to any area of life. At work, high-performance professionals do not depend only on annual goals, but on productivity systems that ensure consistent results. A writer does not finish a book simply because they set the goal of writing 300 pages, but because they created the system of writing 1,000 words every day. An athlete does not become a champion just because they dream of victory, but because they repeat training systems daily that condition them for success. Systems, in this sense, are the invisible gear that keeps the machine running, even when desire fluctuates. Another powerful point defended by James Clear is that systems shape identity more than goals. When someone sets the goal of running a marathon, they may achieve it and then return to a sedentary lifestyle. But if they build the system of running 3 times a week, they become a runner. The goal dissolves after achievement, but the system remains as part of who the person is. This connects to the already discussed principle of identity. We are what we repeatedly do. Thus, systems not only generate external results, but also consolidate a permanent internal transformation. It is important to note that goals are not useless. They serve as a compass, providing initial direction, but the main focus must be on the system because it is what sustains the journey. Goals are about outcomes we cannot fully control. Systems are about behaviors we can repeat daily. This distinction frees people from constant frustration and puts them in direct contact with the process. When you love the system, the result becomes inevitable. As Clear states, you do not rise to the level of your goals, but to the level of your systems. This invisible discipline is the key to understanding why so many attempts at change fail. Isolated goals depend on bursts of effort. Systems create steady flows. Goals live on motivation. Systems live on repetition. Goals focus on the future. Systems shape the present, and since the present is all we have, it is systems that, in the end, build our reality. If creating good habits is already a challenge, breaking deeply rooted bad habits seems, for many, like an impossible mission. That is because harmful behaviors are not just conscious choices, but automatic patterns reinforced over years by triggers, rewards, and beliefs. James Clear teaches that the key to eliminating these habits is not to fight against them with pure willpower, a limited and fragile resource, but to redesign the cycle that sustains them. A bad habit does not disappear by simple desire for change. It must be replaced, disarmed, and weakened strategically. The first step is to attack the trigger. Bad habits are usually linked to specific environmental cues. If someone compulsively eats sweets, perhaps the real problem is not appetite, but the fact that chocolates are always within sight. In this case, hiding, removing, or replacing these triggers is essential. James Clear suggests that we must make the stimuli that awaken harmful behaviors invisible. This can mean not keeping alcohol at home, turning off phone notifications, or even reorganizing entire spaces. When the trigger disappears, the likelihood of the habit being activated drops drastically. The second step is to increase bar friction. Bad habits thrive when they are easy to perform. The more accessible the routine, the more likely it is to be repeated. Therefore, creating physical or psychological barriers makes the behavior harder to maintain. If someone wants to stop watching so much television, they can unplug the device or even remove the batteries from the remote, forcing extra effort. If they want to reduce unnecessary spending, they can delete saved credit cards from shopping sites so that each transaction requires more steps. This extra friction may seem small, but it is enough to interrupt the automation of the habit. The third step is to reduce the immediate reward. Every negative habit persists because it offers instant pleasure, even if it brings harmful consequences in the long run. The challenge is to make this reward less appealing, or to associate it with a negative consequence. For example, creating a social pact with friends so that each slip comes with a financial or reputational penalty. Productivity apps that block social media during work operate on this principle, making the habit of distraction less satisfying. By reducing immediate pleasure, the habit loses strength. The fourth step involves addressing the belief that sustains the habit. Often, harmful behaviors survive not only because of pleasure, but because they are tied to identity. A person may believe that smoking is part of who they are, or that procrastination is part of their personality. As long as this belief remains, any change will be temporary. James Clear shows that the solution is to adopt an alternative, more powerful identity. Instead of saying, "I am an anxious person who cannot stop," one must affirm, "I am someone learning to handle anxiety without depending on this habit." This redefinition shifts the battle from fighting against the behavior to affirming identity. Another essential aspect is understanding that a bad habit cannot be destroyed, only replaced. The brain seeks rewards, and if an old routine no longer provides relief, it must be replaced with another that fulfills the same role. If someone smokes to reduce stress, they need alternatives that bring the same sensation, such as breathing exercises, meditation, or light physical activity. If they procrastinate to avoid anxiety, they can replace the distraction with small, easy tasks that still provide relief, but without long-term damage. Substitution is the key because it keeps the cycle active, but now directed toward positive behaviors. James Clear also emphasizes the importance of applying the principle of patience. Bad habits were often built over years, and expecting them to disappear in a few weeks is a common mistake. The process requires consistency, environmental adjustments, and conscious repetition. Each small victory against the negative habit is a vote in favor of a new identity. Even relapses should not be seen as failures, but as part of the reprogramming process. What matters is not perfection, but the trend. If today you give in fewer times than yesterday, the cycle is already being broken. The great truth is that bad habits are not invincible monsters. They are automatic systems that can be disabled if we understand their logic. By manipulating triggers, increasing friction, reducing rewards, and reconstructing beliefs, we can weaken harmful patterns and replace them with behaviors that reinforce our desired identity. James Clear reminds us that we are not prisoners of our cycles, but architects capable of reprogramming them. If there is one principle that separates those who achieve extraordinary results from the majority who give up halfway, that principle is consistency. James Clear states that it is not the intensity of a single, isolated effort that builds lasting transformations, but the quiet regularity of small actions repeated over time. Science proves that the human brain learns, adapts, and strengthens through repetition. Each habit is like a groove carved in the mind. The more often it is repeated, the deeper it becomes, until the action is almost inevitable. That is why the true key to success does not lie in explosions of motivation or fleeting courage, but in the ability to repeat every single day what seems too simple to even be noticed. Neuroscience explains this phenomenon through a process called myelination. Each time we repeat an action, the neural connections associated with it are reinforced by layers of myelin, which make the transmission of signals faster and more efficient. This means that the more consistent the practice, the more automatic and natural the habit becomes. It is the same mechanism that allows a pianist to perform complex pieces without looking at the keys, or an elite athlete to react with almost instant reflexes. In everyday habits, the same logic applies. It turns someone who starts walking a few minutes a day into a disciplined runner, or someone who writes just a few lines into a prolific writer. Consistency is the invisible ingredient that turns effort into mastery. One of the greatest obstacles to consistency is the search for immediate results. Human beings, driven by the expectation of quick rewards, tend to abandon practices whose impact is not perceived in a short time. This is the trap of positive habits. Their rewards are delayed. Reading today will not make you wiser tomorrow, but years of reading will completely transform your mind. Saving a small amount will not make you rich instantly, but decades of consistency accumulate wealth. Taking care of your health for a few days will not make a noticeable difference, but consistency over the years defines longevity. James Clear calls this phase the Parkes plateau of latent potential, the period when nothing seems to change, but where silent repetition is building the foundation for inevitable transformation. Another fundamental point is to understand that consistency is not perfection. Many people give up because they believe that failing once cancels all progress, but James Clear teaches that what really matters is not allowing one mistake to become the rule. Missing one workout makes no difference. Missing 3 in a row creates a new habit of quitting. The secret is to quickly return to the path without clinging to the idea of failure. Consistency is built in the overall balance, not in isolated days. True discipline is not never failing, but never letting failures multiply. Consistency is also directly connected to identity. When someone maintains a habit repeatedly, they are reinforcing the belief that they are that kind of person. At this point, the habit ceases to be an effort and becomes a natural expression of who they are. A runner no longer needs to force himself to run. He runs because it is part of his identity. A reader does not fight against the desire to read. He simply reads because he sees himself that way. Consistency creates not only results but a new version of ourselves. In today's world, where the pursuit of constant novelty and instant rewards dominates, consistency has become almost a revolutionary virtue. While many chase shortcuts, few are willing to repeat, day after day, the invisible actions that generate extraordinary results. James Clear shows that this is the true difference between those who achieve lasting success and those who live off interrupted attempts. It is not luck or talent, but the simple science of repetition. Ultimately, consistency is the bridge between intention and accomplishment. It is what transforms plans into reality, dreams into achievements, and goals into identity. There is no success without consistency, because there is no transformation without repetition. This is the invisible science that sustains all atomic habits, the certainty that small actions done every day build grand futures. One of the most powerful ideas defended by James Clear is that you cannot improve what you do not measure. This statement, simple and direct, carries a profound truth about how habits and human progress work. The human brain is terrible at evaluating progress intuitively. Without clear metrics, we tend to underestimate our progress or overestimate our failures, which leads to frustration and the abandonment of important routines. That is why tracking habits is an indispensable tool to make them consistent and lasting. The act of measuring transforms the invisible into visible, gives concrete form to what was once only intention, and reinforces motivation by clearly showing that efforts are producing results. Tracking works because it creates immediate feedback. Often, positive habits offer rewards only in the long term, which makes them harder to maintain. Daily reading, exercising or saving money does not produce noticeable transformations in a matter of days, but by measuring each repetition, such as marking pages read, logging workouts, or tracking deposits in savings, we create a form of instant reward. The simple act of seeing accumulated progress generates a sense of achievement that fuels the continuity of the habit. This is why visual methods such as habit calendars, tracking apps, or even notebooks work so well. They give the brain concrete proof that the effort is paying off. James Clear also emphasizes the power of habit accounting. By recording each repetition, we are not only counting actions but reinforcing identities. Each time a day is marked as complete on the calendar, it is as if we are telling ourselves, "I am this type of person." This is the bridge between practice and identity. The record is not only a tool for control, but a symbol of consistency and psychological reinforcement. That is why many people find great power in simple methods, such as the classic "don't break the chain," popularized by Jerry Seinfeld. By marking an X on each completed day, the goal becomes maintaining the unbroken sequence, turning the habit into part of who you are. Another benefit of metrics is allowing conscious adjustments. Many times we believe we are dedicating ourselves more than we really are. A writer may think they write every day, but when recording they realize there were several gaps. An athlete may believe they are training enough, but the numbers show fewer hours than they imagined. This clarity prevents illusions and reveals where the flaws really are. Tracking provides objective data, and data does not lie. This objectivity prevents us from falling into the trap of self-indulgence, where we justify failures without noticing harmful patterns. However, Clear also warns against the risks of turning metrics into an obsession. Measuring should be a support tool, not a prison. When numbers become more important than purpose, the habit loses its meaning. A reader who only worries about counting pages may forget to absorb the content. An athlete who only looks at statistics may lose the connection with the practice itself. The key is balance. Metrics should be used to generate awareness, reinforce consistency, and guide adjustments, never as an end in themselves. In addition, well-applied metrics create what Clear calls visible accountability. Showing progress, whether to ourselves or others, increases commitment. That is why support groups, training communities, or even simple progress sharing on social networks work. They add a social dimension to monitoring. When we know someone is watching our evolution, we are less likely to quit. This external accountability complements internal motivation, creating a support network for the habit. In summary, measuring and monitoring is not just a technical practice, but a psychological strategy. It gives shape to the invisible, reinforces the desired identity, creates immediate rewards, and allows rational adjustments. James Clear shows that habits cannot live only in the field of intention. They need concrete evidence to sustain their continuity. Those who measure evolve. Those who do not measure live blindly, hostage to distorted perceptions. And that is why personal tracking is one of the most powerful keys to turning discipline into lasting results. No habit is formed in a vacuum. Although we often believe that discipline and willpower are solitary efforts, James Clear shows that the community in which we live is one of the most powerful factors in the formation and maintenance of habits. The human being is by nature a social animal. Our brains evolved to seek acceptance, belong to groups, and imitate behaviors that reinforce collective survival. This means that the identity and habits we cultivate are not just individual choices, but also reflections of the culture around us. Thus, when we surround ourselves with people who live the identity we want to assume, our chances of consolidating new habits increase exponentially. James Clear explains that we generally belong to 3 types of groups that directly shape our behavior: family, friends, and the larger community. Each of these circles exerts an invisible pressure on our habits. Families transmit patterns that we often follow throughout our lives, from eating habits to ways of dealing with stress. Friends offer immediate social reinforcement, encouraging or discouraging behaviors. Larger communities, such as local cultures, companies, or even nations, create collective norms that shape what is considered normal. This normality is extremely powerful, as most of us would rather be accepted than be different. If being in shape is the standard in a group, we tend to exercise more. If procrastination or wasting time is the norm, it is difficult to escape this pattern without resistance. This phenomenon is explained by the social pressure of conformity. Psychological studies show that we imitate not only what people say, but more importantly, what they do. This unconscious imitation is a survival mechanism. Historically, following the group meant safety. That is why habits practiced in community are so difficult to abandon. When smoking, drinking, or procrastinating are socially accepted and reinforced, any attempt to change generates resistance, not only internal but also external. James Clear warns that in such cases, the path is often not to fight against the group, but to choose new groups that represent the desired identity. A practical example illustrates this idea well. Someone who wants to start running will have a much greater chance of success if they join a group of runners. In that environment, the desired habit is the norm, and any absence becomes noticeable. This mutual responsibility creates a reinforcement network stronger than individual discipline. The same happens in academic or professional environments. Being surrounded by people who value reading, learning, or innovation transforms these behaviors into standards. James Clear shows that by seeking communities that represent the identity we want, the effort becomes smaller because social energy naturally pushes in the right direction. In addition, the community offers something no solitary effort can: mirrors of identity. When others recognize us as readers, athletes, creators, or disciplined professionals, our own identity is reinforced. This external recognition acts as validation that consolidates habits. At the same time, social responsibility creates an extra layer of commitment. Nobody likes to disappoint those who rely on us. That is why the presence of mentors, training partners, or support groups is so transformative. They not only monitor progress, but also reinforce the belief that we are capable. James Clear emphasizes that community can be used in two strategic ways. First, by choosing groups in which the desired behavior is the norm. Second, by creating accountability systems in which our habits are monitored by others. By combining these two factors, we eliminate much of the brain's natural resistance and align ourselves with social forces that work in our favor. The power of community reminds us that change is not just a matter of individual discipline, but also of belonging. When our habits align with the collective identity, consistency ceases to be a battle and becomes simply a way of remaining within the group. At this point, we understand James Clear's phrase, "If you want to change who you are, change who you walk with." When we think of high performance, we often imagine exceptional talents, natural gifts, or almost superhuman efforts. However, James Clear dismantles this vision by showing that the true differentiator of great athletes, artists, entrepreneurs, and leaders does not lie in innate talents, but in the structure of consistent habits that sustain their careers. Genius, according to him, is not an isolated spark of inspiration, but the accumulated result of small practices repeated every day until excellence becomes inevitable. One of the biggest misconceptions is believing that great achievements are born only from motivation. Motivation may initiate the process, but it is the discipline generated by habits that ensures continuity. Elite athletes, for example, do not train only when inspired. They have rigid routines that make training part of their identity. Renowned artists do not create masterpieces only in moments of inspiration, but write, paint, or compose daily, even on days when they do not feel creative. Successful entrepreneurs do not build companies solely with brilliant ideas, but with daily systems of organization, analysis, and execution. The impact of high performance is, therefore, the impact of consistent habits applied over time. Clear exemplifies this principle with the idea that talent opens doors, but habits keep you inside them. Many promising athletes shine in their youth, but fade away due to lack of discipline. On the other hand, professionals with less raw talent but solid habits of training, recovery, and learning achieve much longer careers. This logic repeats itself in any area. Persistence sustained by systems is more powerful than flashes of genius. That is why atomic habits, seemingly insignificant, become the foundation of high performance. Another crucial point is that habits reduce the need for constant decisions. High performers do not waste energy deciding whether they will train, study, or produce. These actions are already automated in their routines. This automatism frees mental resources for innovation, strategy, and adaptation. By eliminating the friction of decision-making, habits create a kind of autopilot for the essentials, allowing the mind to focus on what really matters. It is this economy of cognitive energy that separates the consistent from the inconsistent, those who achieve peaks of performance from those who oscillate between highs and lows. James Clear also shows that habits create cumulative margins of advantage. In sports, training a little more every day may seem irrelevant in a week, but in a year it translates into a significant physical advantage. In the business world, reviewing processes daily may seem minimal, but over months it generates stronger and more adaptable companies. In art, writing a few lines every day may seem little, but after years it results in works that transcend generations. This is the essence of high performance, not spectacular results from a single effort, but inevitable results from the accumulation of silent efforts. Another important impact is on the management of boredom. Ordinary people give up when the initial enthusiasm ends. High performers continue. The difference is not the absence of boredom, but the ability to persist even when the activity becomes repetitive. Athletes train basic movements thousands of times. Writers rewrite chapters to exhaustion. Entrepreneurs repeat analysis and execution processes daily. This tolerance of boredom is sustained by habits. When the action becomes part of identity, it no longer depends on momentary pleasure, but on internal coherence. Finally, James Clear points out that true high performance is not about doing extraordinary things sporadically, but about doing the basics extraordinarily consistently. It is not about running a marathon once, but about running regularly for years. It is not about writing a single book, but about writing every day. It is not about founding a company by chance, but about managing businesses with constant discipline. That is why atomic habits, simple in their essence, produce results that seem unattainable, because they transform ordinary people into exceptional performers. One of the greatest lessons from atomic habits is the understanding that true progress is not immediate, but accumulated. James Clear states that we live in a culture obsessed with quick results, miraculous shortcuts, and instant rewards, but the reality is that all genuine growth follows the logic of the long term. The main problem is that, in the beginning, the results are invisible. Small positive habits seem to make no difference, just as small negative slips appear harmless. However, over time, these micro-actions accumulate until they form a growth or decline curve that becomes impossible to ignore. It is in this gap between initial effort and delayed results that most people give up, not realizing they were about to cross the turning point. Clear calls this phase the Baishan Valley of Disappointment. It is the period when effort is constant, but results still do not appear. Someone who starts exercising may go weeks without seeing changes in their body. Someone who begins saving money may take months before accumulating a significant amount. Someone who decides to read every day may not notice immediate improvements in their mind. This gap between action and reward kills more habits than any other factor. Most people abandon the practice because they believe it is not working, when in fact, it is simply in the underground stage of growth, like seeds germinating invisibly before breaking through the soil. The turning point occurs when accumulated consistency reaches critical mass. It is like ice that, when heated from -10 to 0 degrees, seems unchanged. Only at the exact point of transition does the transformation occur. The ice melts. All the heat applied before was not useless, but part of an invisible process. In the same way, habits cultivated over the long term may appear stagnant until suddenly the results become inevitable. This logic explains why those who persist in the long run reap extraordinary rewards while others, equally talented, fall by the wayside. The philosophy of the long term also teaches us to respect time as an ally, not as an enemy. In a world where everything is immediate, understanding that each small accumulated victory creates an inevitable future is a rare form of wisdom. James Clear insists that the game of life is not won in days or weeks, but in decades. Investing in habits of reading, health, finances, or relationships may not generate noticeable rewards tomorrow, but over the years, it builds an invisible legacy that reveals itself at the right moment. Patience is the ingredient that transforms effort into legacy. Another crucial point of this philosophy is the reversibility of the process. Just as good habits produce invisible results until they explode into achievements, bad habits also accumulate invisible damage until they turn into disasters. Eating poorly every day may not seem serious for a few months, but over the years, it leads to chronic diseases. Small accumulated debts may seem harmless until they become unpayable. The philosophy of the long term therefore requires awareness. Everything we do today is building an inevitable future, whether of growth or decline. James Clear shows that embracing the long term is about taking responsibility for your own destiny. It is not about expecting immediate results, but trusting the invisible curve that reveals itself only to the consistent. The focus should be on systems, not momentary results. This vision frees people from the anxiety of instant rewards and places them on a safe path where each day is a silent vote for the future they desire. The true philosophy of the long term is, therefore, to live as gardeners of our own lives. We plant seeds every day, take care of them without haste, and trust that in the right time they will bloom. What differentiates those who achieve the extraordinary from those who give up along the way is not talent nor luck, but the ability to endure the invisibility of results until they become inevitable. James Clear is not just a successful author, but one of the most influential thinkers of the 21st century when it comes to human behavior, productivity, and personal development. His legacy lies in having managed to translate complex concepts from psychology, neuroscience, and philosophy into a simple, practical, and deeply actionable language. Atomic Habits is not merely a self-help book. It has become a universal manual for anyone who wishes to change their life through small, consistent actions. His work has crossed borders, been translated into dozens of languages, and reached millions of readers, establishing itself as one of the most important references in the field of continuous improvement. The impact of Clear can be measured across different spheres. In the corporate world, his ideas are applied in leadership training, organizational culture programs, and high-performance strategies within global companies. Many managers have abandoned rigid models of unattainable goals and have instead implemented systems based on sustainable habits. In sports, elite athletes use his principles to reinforce daily discipline, build consistency in training, and maintain the long-term mindset needed to compete at the highest level. In the academic world, his ideas inspire students and teachers to understand that excellence is the result of small repetitions rather than occasional peaks of effort. Beyond influencing individuals and organizations directly, James Clear sparked a broader cultural shift. He brought awareness to the fact that we don't need radical transformations to change our lives, but micro-victories accumulated over time. This message gained momentum in an era marked by haste, constant distraction, and the pursuit of instant gratification. By presenting atomic habits as seeds of change, Clear gave people back the sense of control over their own destiny. He showed that anyone in any circumstance can take a concrete step toward a better identity. Another crucial aspect of his legacy is the emphasis on identity over goals. This shift in focus profoundly impacted the discourse on personal development. Previously, much of motivational literature revolved around achieving grand objectives. Today, thanks to Clear's influence, more and more people understand that it is about building solid identities. This reframing has transformed the way we perceive success and failure. It is no longer about achieving a specific result, but about living consistently with the identity we choose. This vision creates sustainable change because it shapes not only what we do, but who we become. Clear's reach has also been amplified by the way he uses modern communication. His commitment to writing clearly, consistently, and accessibly, whether in books, articles, or lectures, has turned him into one of the most quoted authors of today. Platforms like YouTube, podcasts, and social media have become natural amplifiers of his message, turning it into part of the everyday vocabulary of millions. Today, phrases like systems beat goals or small habits create big results no longer belong solely to his book, but circulate as cultural mantras guiding the mindset of an entire generation. Perhaps the most profound aspect of his legacy is the fact that James Clear is in himself a living example of what he teaches. His journey, marked by discipline, consistency, and personal reinvention, proves that his principles are not abstractions, but applicable realities. He does not speak as a distant theorist, but as someone who rebuilt his own life through atomic habits. This alignment between speech and practice is what grants him authority and makes him such a respected figure. In today's world, where anxiety for the immediate prevails and the illusion of quick success seduces, James Clear represents a voice of balance. His legacy lies in reminding us that the power is in the ordinary, done in an extraordinarily consistent way. It is not daily revolutions that transform lives, but the patience to plant invisible seeds and trust that over time, the extraordinary will become inevitable. For this reason, his influence is not fleeting but lasting. He offered people not just techniques, but a practical life philosophy that will continue to guide generations in search of real and sustainable growth.